So we have our speaker here tonight, who is Andrew Gurza, and I'm just going to read their bio real quick. They are an award-winning disability awareness consultant and the chief disability officer and co-founder of Handy, a sex toy company that puts pleasure within reach for disabled people. Andrew uses they, he pronouns and identifies proudly as disabled. Their work has been featured on BBC, CBC, Daily Extra, Gay Times UK, Huffington Post, The Advocate, Everyday Feminism, Mashable, Out.com, and several anthologies. He was the subject of an award-winning National Film Board of Canada documentary, Picture This. Andrew has guested on a number of podcasts, including Dan Savage's Savage Love and Cameron Esposito's Query. He has spoken all over the world on sex and disability and what it means to be a queer cripple. He is also the host of Disability After Dark, the podcast shining a bright light on disability stories, which was nominated for a Canadian Podcast Award, a Queerty Award, and was chosen as an honoree at the 2020 Webby Awards. The show is available on all platforms, and he is also the creator of the viral hashtag Disabled People Are Hot. And you can find out more about him by going to www.andrewgurza.com and connecting via social media at Andrew Gurza. So we have an awesome speaker here tonight. This will go on from 7 to 8, and then from 8 to 9:30, or 8 almost to 10, is the Kink ability, which is going to be a panel discussion all about kink and being sexy and disabled. So stay for that part. That'll be in the same link. And a friendly disclaimer. This is about sexuality and disability, so this discussion may not be suitable for children. I always say may not because it's up to parents' discretion, right? What children can learn from. I feel like lots of conversations are very educational, but it all depends. So just be mindful of who's in the room with you and who may hear this content. Okay, so group agreements. I guess I should say I'm also a sexuality educator. And I work in like the Philadelphia area, and I've worked a lot with people with disabilities and stuff. And I always like to start sessions with just simple group agreements so that we can create a space of safety in the room together. Even if we're not like technically together in a room, it's still, we're sharing this space. Okay, so respecting pronouns and identity of others. Feel free to add your pronouns if you want in your Zoom name. You can click on participants and rename yourself there. Feel free to meet people in chat. Feel free to ask if you can talk to them one-on-one, but make sure not to we're not doing a singles event today, right? So we're not like trying to meet people to date necessarily unless you meet someone who's cool. You can exchange contact info, but just make sure not to harass anyone in chat. And self-care, we said, use the chat box all you want, have fun. Are there any more suggestions from the group, from the audience members, of things that we can do to help create a safe space here today? Awesome, okay, so I think we're good to go then. I'm gonna stop sharing and we'll start the conversation. So give me a second. Okay, Andrew. Oh, sure. Of course, Connie. So I wanted to ask you, Andrew, what got you interested in doing this work in the first place?
How many hours do we have for this? Hi, first of all, hi everybody, and I want to thank Disability Pride Virtual PA for having me. Again, I think I did a thing for you folks last year, possibly. I've talked to some of you before, or it could just be my social media presence, but I recognize some of you. But I want to thank you for having me. It's really great to be here. To answer your question, I got started doing this work in 2012 and 2013. After I had finished school, I was looking for a job, and I studied law and disability. That was what both my master's and my BA is in. So I have a lot of higher education, too much higher education, I would say. And I was looking for a job, and nobody would hire me. Nobody would give me a job. And I went to, I don't know what it's like there in Philadelphia, but in Toronto and Ontario, we have um, disability employment officers that will help you find work. So I went to them and said, I want to be a disability speaker. Can you find me an organization that I could apply to, do that in? And they went, oh, that's not a real job, sweetheart. That's a hobby. And I was like, oh, well, fuck you. Watch me make it a real job. Um, and so I printed a business card that said, my name is Andrew Gurza. I'm a disability consultant, disability awareness consultant, which I stole from somewhere, I'm sure, and put it on a business card and said I talk specifically about queerness and disability. And everybody told me this is not a job, this is a hobby, like this will not vet you any money. This is not safe, this is not sustainable. And I just kept being like, let me just try, let me just see, let me just put it out there, let me just brand myself as this person that talks about queerness and disability. And the next thing I know, um, I was cold emailing places like HuffPost and places like The Advocate and all those magazines you mentioned in my bio, just saying, here's who I am, here's what I do, I have a story to tell. Getting my foot in the door of these places, not getting paid initially at first, just doing some, making a name for myself. And then eventually I was like, oh, I can do something with this. So it really came out of a necessity of like, I can use my personal story to sustain myself. And that's where it really came out of. It wasn't even something I had thought about doing when I was in school. But when I needed money, I was like, well, this is what I got. I better use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you like saw it as a tool, as a way to like be a foundation for yourself to live,
Yeah,
basically.
it really was a survival tactic. It wasn't even me trying to be like have hubris or be super like, look at me, I'm so great. It was no, it was like I need money. I can use this to make myself some money.
But you're using like your disability wisdom. I call it disability wisdom that we all have. Like our experience living with disabilities, especially lifelong ones, it can help to like we can communicate our stories to other people because it might help them.
Exactly. Um, like exactly right. Like I think we all do have crib wisdom and disability wisdom, and so we need to use it. And I think using our using our disabilities to make a living for ourselves is hard. It's not easy because you have to be very vulnerable and very forthcoming about a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't want to talk about. But I love it because it gives non-disabled people a place to start learning about disability that's very raw and real for them, and it gives disabled people a place to be like, oh yeah, I go through that too. I go through that. I live that as well. So I'm very
Mm-hmm.
proud of what I built out of my story.
Yeah, I think growing up with like in my sex education, at least, I never saw like other disabled people talking about it, or like I never saw myself represented in the information. So to know that you do it and you go out there and present it like in a disability friendly way is really, really cool to me.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Like, it's also really cool to me that I get to do it because it's not something that I ever expected to go anywhere. Like to be asked to do stuff, even stuff like this, still I'm kind of like, wow, this is like never something I expected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to like dig in a little bit more and ask you a little bit about your podcast and Disability After Dark.
Sure, ask away.
Awesome. So I've noticed I haven't listened to all of the episodes, but there are so many episodes of
What? You haven't
Disability
listened to
After
all of
Dark.
them? Come on. Why not? No, I'm kidding. It's all right. It's okay.
I'm getting through them. And I love so many of the episodes. And I wanted to ask if there are some more memorable episodes that you would want to kind of recap with us today, or any like memorable moments that are related to sexuality and disability that you learned through the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I love being able to sit down with people and hear their stories, and I love talking to disabled people about. I'm gonna use a blue word here. I love talking to people about fucking and sex and learning about their experiences. I'm trying to think of a particular sex and disability moment that's like I can think of a disability moment, but it's not necessarily sexuality related. But I've shifted the podcast now from being primarily a sexuality show to like just a show about disability stories, because after 150 episodes of sex, I got bored and I was like, I want to do more with this. Let me change it up a little bit. So there's an episode I did recently where I talked to three people from Nova Scotia, Halifax, Canada, who um, were wanting to talk to me about the housing crisis in their town and how it was hard for them to find accessible housing, and how some of them had to live in group homes and like seniors homes, um, just to survive. And that was really memorable because when you think of disabled people who are like in their 20s and 30s living in a seniors home because they can't find any other accessible options, like I was floored. I was like, wow, that's really scary. And so that was memorable, and it was not a fun episode by any means, but it was a very important one because they shone a light on how sparse the disability housing is and why we don't talk about it more, and how much that can impact your mental health as a disabled person to not have a home. And so that one, I always think back to that one. More of the sexy ones, like I loved interviewing Dan Savage last year about, or 2 years ago now, about asking him what would happen if he became disabled tomorrow. That's one of the series that I love doing on the show that I call "What Would Happen If You Became Disabled Tomorrow," where I ask a non-disabled person to play a little thought experiment with me, and I ask them to think about, like, okay, so you're a porn star, great. Let's think about what would happen if you became disabled tomorrow. How would your life change? And I get them to go through, how would your life change? How would your day change? What do you think about that? How would your access to sexuality change, do you think? How would your access to your partner change? Like those are fun because it really gets the larger queer community, and they're not always queer, but they usually are, the larger queer community to think about, oh, I never considered this, to really get them to gently and without harming them think about their ableism in a way that is like safe, of space where they can think about how they haven't really considered disability before, without me saying like, well, fuck you, you didn't think about disability. It's me saying, all right, let's talk about it together. And so I love doing that stuff because I get to talk to hot porn stars or Dan Savage, and then I get to ask cool questions. So those ones are really fun.
Mhm.
But lately, I've been really into just wanting to share people's stories about disability on the podcast. So now, like it initially, Disability After Dark was like a sexy moniker to talk about sex, and now it's like I want to just talk about story.
Mhm.
Disability story is so important to me because it's so rare that we hear someone's individual disability story, and I want to use that platform to amplify those voices.
Mhm. That's amazing. And like even in those stories, I always say this as a sex educator, even in the stories that don't necessarily have sexuality in them, it can still be a part of it because we're always working in power systems or power struggles, or like we're always having to navigate like intimacy depending on what that intimacy looks like, because intimacy is measured in lots of different ways, right? Like we can
Yeah,
be sort of intimate if our caregiver is helping us shower, but it's different from like romantic intimacy, but it's
yeah,
still part of intimacy and like how we look at sexuality.
yeah, completely.
One thing I talk about a lot in sessions is how sexuality can be so broad, like for people with disabilities, like anyone really, but our culture is very focused on like
P and G
intercourse.
insertion. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. um do you ever talk to other disabled people about like how things that you wouldn't think of to be sexy could be sexy?
Oh yeah. Well, not so much to other disabled people, but I talk just on my social media about like how my wheelchair is sexy. Like I'm doing a whole bunch of weird hashtags right now about like I created one this morning that was like queers and chairs, and I did a picture of me like in my wheelchair looking hot, and like just playing with the fact that I'm a wheelchair user. Why don't we play with this? Why can't, like, I always make the joke like, do you want to touch my big joystick? Do you want to like those are things that have been medicalized. And like I did an adult video last year with a friend of mine, part of an educational thing and partly for a porn company. But we did a video, and he was using equipment that I get in and out of bed with to hold himself up while I provided, pleasure. So I love that too because it was like, wow, these things that we don't consider sexual are now totally being sexualized. And so there's imagery of me somewhere, like giving pleasure to this person and him using my hoist
Mm-hmm.
to like enjoy that moment. And so like I love that because we never see it. So I love to play with that stuff for sure.
Mm-hmm. Like the picture that I showed with your like tattoos on your chest and everything, like sends such a powerful message.
It basically says, fuck you, but I'm also here to fuck. Like that's basically what it says. Um,
I love it. I love it. So another thing I was thinking, because you touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to go back to it because something we talk about a lot in Disability Pride PA. Oh, thanks, Mom. um, is
that's your mom? Amazing.
yeah, it's my
Amazing.
mom.
Hi.
um, Something we talk about a lot in Disability Pride is like we're celebrating Disability Pride. It's also Gay Pride weekend this weekend in Pennsylvania. I
I
think
think I think
someone
pretty much like everywhere in the world, this is the big like final weekend. This is like at least in North America, this is the big thing.
yeah, we're having like some difficulties in Philly with Pride, but we can talk about that another time. But I wanted to ask, what do non-disabled people totally get wrong or miss in queer spaces about people with disabilities?
Access. And the story that I can use to highlight that is one time, or 2 years ago, there was a big gay kink Halloween party at this place called the Black Eagle. I don't know if they have one in Philly, but they have one in Toronto. And it's like a predominantly gay male leather bar. And I wanted to go because I'm into leather and I'm into like kink a little bit and I like being dominated, but that's a whole other story. Um, so I wanted to go to this party and I knew the bar wasn't accessible, but I thought I would just call and see what they would say if I called and said I want to get in. And I had heard that if you go in the back, you can maybe get your chair in. And I was like, all right, well, no, that's not ideal, but I'll do it anyway because I want to go. So I called them up and I said, hi, my name's Andrew Gurza. I'm a disability consultant. I want to come to your thing and I want to like promote accessibility there. And also I want to come. Can you help me get my wheelchair in? And they said, oh yeah, we don't think we have the room for your power chair. Can you just get another wheelchair for the night? And I paused and I like let the silence hang there for a minute and I let the person realize what they had said and be like, do you want to repeat that? Because you need to hear yourself. So I made him repeat it. And he goes, oh, can you just get another wheelchair? And I was like, you heard yourself, right? You heard what you just said? And I said, no, I can't. Asking me to get in the wheelchair is like asking me to bring other legs for the night. I can't do that. And he was like, oh, sorry, then it's not accessible for you. Bye. And he hung up. And so, like, what we get wrong is access, and that access looks different for everybody. And we need to, if you say you're accessible and you think your accessibility needs to stop with a ramp, a button, or an elevator, you're not accessible because even if you have all those things and I roll in the space in my leathers, in my wheelchair, all that stuff ready to party, and I don't get talked to by one person that night, and believe me, it's happened, then your place is not accessible because you haven't addressed the attitudes of your community. Um, and I think we don't remember, and able-bodied people, whether they mean to or not, many of them just don't know, and they just don't mean to. They don't realize that like if you don't address the emotional ableism in the room and the way that no one will talk to me, and you don't create workshops at your kink events that are like, hey, wheelchair using kinky people like to fuck too, maybe we should talk about that for a minute. If you don't do that, then no matter what queer space you go into, like, you're not going to feel included. And I've gone to many queer spaces where I don't look or am not perceived like the other dudes in the room, and I just feel, I'm like, what was the point of me coming? I should just have gone home.
Mm-hmm. I feel like in queer spaces, like visibly disabled people tend to find each other, and get together, because I at least like, or like end up talking together because we find common ground, because we're like often
Yeah.
in this like sea of experience that isn't really like planned for us to be there.
They literally didn't think about what our needs were. And I think
Mm-hmm.
why that frustrates me as a queer disabled person, and I say this all the time in the work that I do, you will, if you're queer and able-bodied right now, you will become queer and disabled at some point in your life, whether that be through an accident, God forbid, whether that be through old age, whether that be through, you ran into the sexiest disabled person in your life and you want to date them or go out or get to know them. You're going to encounter disability somewhere in your sex life, and when that happens, you're still going to want to be included, right? So why aren't we considering it now? It's just so myopic that our community that preaches love is love every other fucking day doesn't want to look at the ableism that is rampant in our community. And it makes me like, it's so frustrating because I keep saying the same thing. And I'm like, why is no one doing more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt that way for so many years. Why is no one doing more? Like when we tell them, like, "Hey, this is the issue. We're
Like,
we're
you know,
responding to this."
if
Like,
anybody
come on.
from Philly Pride is watching right now, and I'm sure there's someone in there watching, um, we have events at gay bars all the time with drag queens and go-go dancers and things for, HIV and AIDS fundraisers, which is fantastic and important and great. Why can't we do the same to get a fucking button in the bar?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we have, like, a drag queen come and do a show to raise money to make sure that there's a fucking ramp in a bar? Why? Can someone
Mm-hmm.
tell me? I don't know. And it doesn't happen anywhere. And it's like, what the fuck, guys? We have all these resources. Why don't we use them?
Yep. And I think it goes back to your question of asking people, like, what do you think that? Oh, Charlie in the chat, like that. What? Um, what was the question I was gonna ask? What do you? Oh, it totally escaped me. It'll come back. It'll come
You were
back.
saying, what did you
It's all
think
right.
that?
Say that again.
You were saying, what did you think that?
It totally escaped me.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's just something about like I'm queer, and like going into queer spaces just feels overwhelming. Even like 2 weeks ago, my friend and I were trying to go to a outdoor like queer, um, just like a sip in the park thing,
Yeah.
and the location of it was really hard to find. First of all, like the location of the actual event, and then getting down to it, we didn't know where the ramps were. Like it was just like there was no information about how to get there
And
and
I
how to
bet
do
you
it.
no one knew how to tell you how to get there because nobody thought about that because they don't use the ramp. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and there was like lots of construction also, which really doesn't help getting around the city in a
No, of
wheelchair.
course, like it's just the level of afterthought that we are in queer spaces, and then when gently call in a queer establishment, or if you less gently call somebody out and be like, hey, can we fucking fix this, please? Then they get all offended at you. Well, how could you? We had one wheelchair in here one time, and it's like, well, cool, you had one. There's
Mm-hmm.
more than one in the world. Can we fix this, please?
Yeah, I think the ableist attitudes are definitely like at the root of it in
Oh
the end.
yeah.
I was thinking of another time where I went with friends to Outfest here in Philly, which is like I think it's around October. And one time they had like a wheelchair accessible porta potty, but they put it like on the edge of the curb, so
Come on,
someone
come
couldn't get.
on.
You'd have to step up into it.
Uh,
So that was some like we really threw them over the coals on
yeah, I
social
know,
media.
and as we should have done. Like that's ridiculous.
Yeah. So I think like yeah, like you're saying, you worked for years, talked to communities. We're just gonna have
Like,
to keep using our voices.
and I think one of the things that's really frustrating in queer spaces too, when I go there, and I've been to like really big events, and I was in Hollywood last year for an event that I was. That sounds so bougie, but I was in Hollywood last year for an event for the podcast was nominated somewhere, And I was at this event. My mom and I got there because I took my mom, because of course I did. I'm a good gay son. I took my mom to Hollywood, and we went to this event, and we got there, and it was none of it was accessible. Like I could get in the room, but that was about it. And my mom and I were both like, "This is how do you, like, how would somebody?" There was no ramps, and when we got to the space, like I was nominated for this award, so we looked on the stage, and I said, "Well, I didn't win." And she goes, "How do you know?" And I was like, "Well, there's no ramp on the stage. Had I won, don't you think they would have put a ramp there or something so that I could get up?" Obviously, I didn't win. It didn't matter, but I just thought the accessibility was so lackluster. And if I had been like an LA resident wanting to go party with whoever was there, I couldn't go to this club. And they were like shocked to see me there because they'd never seen a disabled person at this venue. And I just thought, like, fucking hell, how do queer people get, like, how do you interact with this community if you can't even get in the door?
Hmm. Like here, reminds me of here in Philly, there's a sex toy shop that's very inaccessible. Like you have to walk down these really narrow steps, and they're very, very tall steps too. And I was just like, I said to them, like, is there a way you can make this accessible? And they were like, I mean, it's fine right now. Like we don't usually have people in wheelchairs in our store. And I was like, because they can't get into
Yeah,
your
they
store.
can't even remotely get it. Like, this makes me really upset because, like, don't you realize that, well, a lot of disabled people don't have a lot of money. If we want a fucking sex toy, we'll save the money or we'll do something to get the thing we want, and we will patronize your establishment. So, like, don't you want to make more money? Don't you want to? Why?
Mhm.
We'll do it for you. There was one bookstore in Toronto. They've recently become accessible over the last few years, but for years and years they weren't um, technically accessible. And the one thing I love about the staff member that worked there, he doesn't work there anymore, but when he worked there, he would say, if you can't get the book you want, call us and I will leave the store and I will come to your house and I will bring you the book. Again, doesn't allow you to have the experience of being at the bookstore, but at least they were trying to, like, we know we're shit. Let me try to do something to make it better. And I always appreciated that because, yeah, maybe you don't have the resources to renovate your whole store and change everything right now. And I understand that, but they were trying something to make it at least sort of accessible. So I appreciated the thought.
Hmm. I think just making sex toys as accessible as possible for people with disabilities is
That's what
the
we're.
key.
That's I know where you're going now.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you about sex toys and like, what is the importance of them for people with disabilities?
Oh wow. Again, do you have 7 hours? Yeah, the importance of sex toys with people with disabilities is that we like to masturbate too, and we like to get off, and we deserve the right to have sexual pleasure in whatever form that takes. And a lot of people, because of the ableism we just spoke about, don't have the opportunities to have physical sexuality with the person, um, or people. And, sex workers, which I am in full support of and in full use of post pandemic and pre pandemic, they're a lot of money. They're not on the cheap, and a lot of disabled people don't have a disposable income to spend 250 an hour to, like, get off with a human being. So sex toys allow a disabled person to have pleasure in whatever way they want, and so many sex toys on the market are not accessible to disabled people.
Hmm. That is so, so true. And we have, as Disability Pride PA, we have done a few workshops on sex toys and how to make them a little more accessible for you. But I'd love it if you wanted to talk about Handy, the
Yeah,
Handy
I was
toy.
waiting I was waiting for you to, like, prompt me in there.
Go for it.
Yeah, so Handy is a company my sister and I created. We just launched it officially in 2020. We've been talking about it for the last 3 years, and we launched. My sister lives in Australia. Her name's Heather, and I'm Andrew. So partially it's like Heather and Andrew, handy, but also it's a reappropriation of the word handicapped because we wanted to play with the fact that, like, this is such a common term and it was once derogatory, and we could play with it. So we decided to we were on the beach in Australia. I was visiting her in 2018, and she asked me, don't you work in sex and disability? And I said, yeah. She goes, well, could we design something like a sex toy for you, or like tell me more about sex toys. And I told her that most of the sex toys were not accessible because for somebody with limited dexterity and limited hand function like me, I'll show you my hands. For somebody with limited hand function, touching those tiny buttons or keeping a toy in place to try to get the right vibration to get off can be really hard. Plus, opening a sex toy box can be really complicated and really like hard to do. Plus, asking your attendant for setup and all the like, that can be really awkward depending on who you have as a care worker. So we were like sitting on the beach, and I told her all this, and we had this big talk, and she goes, well, kind of naively was like, do you want to make one? And I remember squinting at her being like, do I want to make a sex toy with my sister? I don't know how I feel about that. It feels kind of weird. But the more and more we started talking about it, we put a survey out on SurveyMonkey just to like 100 participants around the world and said, is on Reddit. And we said, is this something that you want in the world? And 50 and 63% of people said they had trouble masturbating because of hand limitations. 56% of people said some other stat that I cannot remember for the life of me right now, which I should know. Sorry, and 92% of people said they were waiting for a toy like this. So when we realized that 92% of people wanted a toy like this on the market, we were like, that represents hundreds of millions of people that want this toy. This is bigger than just making a toy for Andrew. This is a toy that could change the world. So I see somebody wants to give me credit. Thank you. So we decided to just start going, and we did a GoFundMe. We raised about 10 grand to get our first leg of research done. And then we paired with a research team out of Australia to actually design a toy that would be as accessible for people with hand limitations as possible. So if I were to give you a quick synopsis, it looks like if a pool noodle and a body pillow had a baby, that's what the toy looks like. So it's very big. It's meant to be big because if you don't have fine motor skills, you need gross motor skills. And gross motor skills mean usually you need something bigger. And so this is why we thought of it this way.
Nice. I'm excited to see it launch out on the market.
Yeah, we're hoping pre-sales will start in August, September, hopefully, fingers crossed. The pandemic really fucked us on that one. Um, we also, though importantly, it's important to know, we also launched a book called The Handy Book of Love, Lust, and Disability, which is when we were designing the toy and talking to our test participants, they were telling us stories about sex and disability. And we were like, these stories are really important. We should do something with these stories. And so we started hearing these stories and we were like, well, why don't we just compile them into a book? So we took 50 stories from 50 contributors no, sorry, let me rephrase. We took 50 contributors from all over the world and asked them 15 questions about sex, like, what is the sexiest thing someone's ever said to you about your disability? How does it feel to have sex with chronic pain? What is the worst thing about sex and disability? Like really deep questions that go beyond how do you have sex? Because every time we talk about sex and disability anywhere, it usually stops and starts with, so like, how do you do it? And like, that's it. There's no discussion of how does it feel? There's no discussion of do you like it? Are you enjoying yourself? There's no consideration of the emotional like factors that go into a disabled person wanting to have sex. And this book really does that and really goes into like gets under the covers of like how does it feel to be disabled and sexual. Let's talk about that. We explore things like sex work. We explore things like trans and gender nonconforming identity. We explore all of these things, and I'm really really proud of it. And if you buy a book from our site, which I think Izzy linked there, if you buy a book either through a physical book, through an ebook, or through a audiobook, every dollar you spend goes into the creation of the toy. So it doesn't go into our pockets. We don't get paid. It's literally, we're using it as a fundraising mechanism to make this toy actually be on the market. So please, please, please buy a book, and because it really would help us get this thing launched.
Mhm. And it's full of like awesome information about sexuality.
It's one of the things that I'm most proud of because we don't see that out there. And I think as much as we in the disabled community rely on books like The Ultimate Guide to Sex and Disability, which I love, no shade, they're great, but they are 20 years old and they are very clinical. If you read that book, it's like, wow, I'm reading a doctor's textbook on how to fuck. And for this book, I said to Heather when we were designing it, I was like, I want to create something that really talks about how does it feel. Let's go into that. Let's really explore that. It was really fun for me to do that. And so like, if you want to listen to my weird audiobook voice doing that, like we also, I recorded half the audiobook. So if you feel so inclined, feel free to do that.
Awesome. I was going to ask you if you did the voice for the
Yeah, I
audiobook.
did, and I can tell you, I have never. When you do a lot, I've done some voiceover work, and when you do the same line over and over again, you laugh your head off. There are outtakes of me just falling apart laughing at stuff that is not funny, but I'm so tired. I'm like, oh god, it's hilarious.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing all this with us, Andrew.
I'm so happy to be here. It's such a pleasure. Talks have been sparse this pandemic, so I really appreciate the opportunity.
I want to see if anyone would like to ask Andrew some questions now for the last few minutes we have. Q&A time. Go for it, y'all.
Oh, thank you, Charlie. I just read your thing, and if I can just say what it is, because I really appreciate it. He said, I must give Andrew credit. I was really torn on the legalization of sex work, but your IG post made me realize that my ableism and ridiculous view on sex work. Thanks for helping me get where I need to be. Well, you're welcome. It's a journey, and sometimes acceptance of different things doesn't happen overnight. And I can just say that when I was considering sex work, I was like, oh, well, people think that I'm, dirty and that I've done it the wrong way. But now that I work with one primary sex worker and sometimes others when I want to like splurge and have a treat myself. Um, but it's given me my confidence back and my sexuality back in a way that I'm so proud of. So I think it should be, first of all, not just legalized, it should be decriminalized, and it needs to be a part of disability justice. It needs to be a part of when we talk about disability justice, we need to talk about sex. We're not doing that. Everybody talks about access. Well, my access to I'll be blunt, my access to dick is also a disability rights issue. So no, I'm kidding. But what I mean is that we all should be talking about that.
Mm-hmm. You're getting comments on your shirt in the chat.
Oh, it says I told Mai that I would be wearing it tonight for this, so she knew it was coming. She knew.
Nice. Does anyone have any questions for Andrew or comments?
Also, this is the point of the conversation where I wanted to say, whenever people ask if they have questions, people sit there doughy-eyed and say nothing, and then like 2 days later, I'll get emails from people being like, "Oh yeah, I had a question." So please, feel free to ask. I won't be offended by any question you ask. I've heard them all before. Like I'm not scared. Don't be scared. You're in a safe space here to do that.
Hey, Andrew.
Hi, Kelly.
Hey. My hair's a mess, or I would turn my video on. Sorry.
Oh, let me see. I mean, if you want to, no pressure.
Okay, I'll do it. Sorry. It just
Hello. No, I like it. It's good.
Okay. I have to bring the TV show up just because I watched it 2 days ago. The episode special season 2, where he gets fetishized by someone when they're having sex, right? And I was just thinking about like how do you keep, because you say it all the time and I love it, disabilities are sexy, or my disabled body is hot, like all that stuff that, to remind us, and I think even to remind you, right? So like, how do you take someone finding that hot about you, right? But not letting it fall into fetishization?
That's a great question. It's a hard one because it's what's hard in a good way. I mean, which sounds really dirty now, but I mean it's a good question. It's hard because I fetishize myself. Like you see it on my social media. I do it all the time to get people focused on what I'm talking about. And so I think, to use the example of Special, where the character of Ryan is fetishized in that way, I think it's really jarring when you dehumanize the person in the process. So when that guy was like, oh yeah, your weird legs are so hot, your like weird disability body is so attractive. Like you're not checking with him if that's okay. You're just barfing that on him in a really vulnerable moment when he's like, "Oh, I wanted to fuck you. I wasn't ready for this." Like what? I don't. So like, I think, with my sex workers and the people that I see sexually or romantically, like I'll make disability jokes, and when I'm comfortable with them, I'll say like, "I want you to feel comfy to do that because I want to bring you into my world." That's me giving them permission to like dip their toe into
Yeah.
that water and play with me. I think when you dehumanize the person in any capacity, like I've seen weird disability fetishization where it's like, oh, your wheelchair is so hot, you don't have to be involved, but I want to like get it on with your chair. And it's like, what? Hang on. Like, I'm
Oh,
here ready to fuck you and you want to do my wheelchair. What? So like it's that kind of stuff, or where they'll say stuff like, oh, I want to make it so you can't move and you can't do anything even more than you already can. That's weird and dehumanizing. But if you were like, I'm gonna be blue here for a minute. If somebody was like, I want to touch your big joystick and we were joking around and they checked and said like, hey, how do you feel about that? And if I laughed off and said, keep going, then fine. But if I said like, hey, that feels weird, then it's all about communication. And I think if you just communicate, like I want to be able to see your disability, how do you want me to do that? And if in bed, do you want me to at all? Let the person tell you what they want because for each person it's different.
yeah. Thank you. I love the addition of consent as you go along.
I mean,
As
consent is wrapped up in everything we do,
yeah,
and we tend to forget that like it's all part of everything.
yeah,
I could say something yes to something in 5 minutes, but also no in 5 minutes later, and both of those things are valid and fine.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you just made Izzy's sex educator heart swoon
Mhm.
over and over again by that statement.
Always.
I know I can see her being like, "Yeah, good."
Consent, yes, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate you chatting about
Thanks
that.
so much for the question. I really appreciate it.
Are there any other questions for Andrew?
I know there are.
Or you could send them, like, if you wanted to be anonymous, you could send it to me and I can just ask the question.
I'm not gonna bite hard. So
Unless we want you to.
yeah, that's right. With
Consent.
consent and love.
I have a question.
Yes.
So what's next?
In terms of wow. Uh, well, the pandemic has really fucked a lot of things for me. I can't go anywhere to do anything. So I'm trying to start my own classes similar to this kind of stuff on Zoom because I need to make some money and talks are not coming around as much as I'd like to because no one has money right now. So I'm trying to start my own classes, um, just doing more of the podcast. I just launched podcast merch, um, which maybe I'll put in the chat a link to buy. If you listen to the show, people can buy merch.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to do a lot of stuff virtually because I love the fact that we don't have to. Part of me as an introvert, I know you're all like, what? You're an introvert? No way. As an introvert, I like the idea that I don't have to go anywhere. I love it actually because I can do all my work from my house. So a lot of podcasting, a lot of twittering, um, just doing the work that I do from my home and like once the sex toy launch is big, then hopefully I'll be able to do a lot of cool stuff like that. The podcast just got offered to have uh, a piece written about me, a very small piece written about me in Forbes magazine, which was like
Awesome.
really cool and weird but awesome. So yeah, just more what I'm doing. And if anybody out there, like if anybody from the sponsor, one of them was, which university is the sponsor?
Temple University's Institute on Disabilities.
If anybody from Temple University Institute on Disability needs a speaker, I'm here. I am here. I will speak for you. Let me know. But yeah, that's what's next so far.
That's great. Well, I always love to hear what people are thinking about, especially like post pandemic. Because it's like
post pandemic, I'm gonna have a lot of sex. That's
woohoo.
as soon as I'm safe well, no, because it's been 16 months since I've had any kind of intimacy from another person because I just can't and it's not safe. And so, I haven't been able to see my sex worker in 16 months, and we talk all the time and say hello, but it's not the same. And so the minute we're allowed to and it's safe, I've said to him, like, I want to book you for an overnight because I feel like we've earned some fucking time together. So, I mean, I'm going to access my intimacy again when I get the chance to.
That is awesome. I'm glad to hear it.
Excited.
Awesome.
I know there are questions. I know there are.
We have a few more minutes for questions.
Come on, don't be scared. It can be a disability question too. It doesn't have to be like a sexy question. It can be. I also do disability rights stuff, so don't feel like you have to keep it to sex. What has the pandemic meant for me in terms of intimacy? Thanks, Kaylin. Well, like I just kind of said to Vicky there, I haven't really had it physically. It's meant a lot of like, talking to my sex worker, and just chatting. I was in the hospital at the beginning of the pandemic last year for some stomach stuff because GI stuff is super fun. So that was a weird kind of intimacy moment for me. 4 days in the hospital, like with GI stuff, hoping that I didn't get COVID and hoping that like the only people that touched me weren't the nurses. But so that was weird. But yeah, I agree with you in terms of like the only touch that I've had over the last year and a half has been primarily with caregivers or care. And we're taught when we use attendant care, many of us who use attendant care are taught to turn the intimate part of our brains off because you want to respect the boundary of the person that's helping you, and you don't want to, cross the boundary, and of course not. So turning it off, like I don't know what sex will look like when I get to have it again. I'm actually terrified because I'm like, I haven't done it in so long. I don't know how it's gonna go.
Yeah, you'll just be entering in new territory.
Well,
Old territory.
not to be crass, but I'll be entering a lot of territory.
I love it. We have about 2 more minutes, and then we'll kind of switch over some tech stuff and some speakers and that kind of stuff. But we got some
Absolutely.
minutes.
I also wanted to see if Andrew, if you were okay with, while we're doing our tech stuff on our end, if we could show your YouTube that's called How to Fuck a Cripple.
The one I did with Davey Wavy?
Yes, because I just think it's hysterical.
I haven't seen it in a number of years, and I have to tell you, if you watch that video, I'm happy to watch it, sure, no problem. When you watch, you'll see me staring at Davey Wavy in very inappropriate ways the whole way through. But yeah, of course, I'm happy to let that go.
Absolutely. Thank you.
No problem.
Awesome. Well, if there aren't any more questions, you know where to find Andrew, so you can ask your questions later, of course. Yeah, thank you so much for coming, everyone. Like, really, thank you. Your questions were so thoughtful, and like, just, I feel like I have a lot more to think about after this.
We could think about it on the podcast together. We should do that sometime.
Yes, we will.
Yeah.
Totally will. Thank you, everyone. Hang out for a bit. We're gonna just switch some stuff over, and feel free to keep chatting in the chat. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to watch this video. Because hopefully I'm going to get it to work right. La la la. Hold on.
I see me there.
It's me. It might help if I turn my video on. That always helps, doesn't it?
One hopes.
Can everybody see this? Izzy?
Yes.
Can you see? Okay, just want to make sure. Because
Mhm.
once I start to do this, I can't see anything.
There's a little like gray box at the bottom, but other than
Hold
that,
on hold on 1 second. You know what that is? That's the captions.
okay.
And I'm hoping that it'll pick up on his words once we finish. So that's what my hope is. So
I'm a disability awareness consultant, crippled content creator, podcast host, and queer cripple. Cripple was like a bad word, and so it's a really derogatory word. It means invalid, it means you can't take care of yourself, it means you're less than. It's been prescribed to me you're less than. So, my thing was like, well, let's fucking take that word back, and let's transform it into something awesome. If I call myself a cripple, anything you say to me about disability can't hurt me. I know what all the prejudices are, I've heard them 1,000 times. So if I say, hey, I'm a cripple, this is who I am, none of that can hurt me. It's a word that I use as an armor for myself to deal with ableism. I want to make this video because we don't talk about sex and disability at all in our pop culture world generally. We're starting to very slowly, but especially in queer male culture, disability is not something we address. And I wanted to just bring it out there and play with it some more and to make it something palatable for this community. That's why I wanted to do this video. In order to how to fuck a queer cripple, you have to be ready to communicate. You really truly have to have hard conversations around what you're able to do, what you're not able to do, what you might need from a partner, what you might need from an attendant, how all those things work. If you're an able-bodied person and you want to sleep with a partner who's disabled, you have to open your mind to different possibilities, possibly not even getting off at all, different ways of looking at sexuality that isn't, oh, I just came and now we're done. That's sex. Ways of like, we spent some time together and that was nice. That even if you don't do it the normative way, if you can derive pleasure out of that experience and look at the disabled body in a different way than you may have done before, that's something that's great. We're communicating about sex with me. You can't forget that I'm disabled in that experience. Talking about the disability as part of the experience is necessary when we talk about communication. So like, how am I going to get you out of your wheelchair? How am I going to do this? So okay, Andrew, your fantasy is this. The reality is this. Can we get somewhere in between of that to make this happen for you? Or I, as a disabled person, will be comfortable with this, but my non-disabled partner might not be comfortable providing me care for that. So how do we talk about all the stuff in between that when we think about sex, when our fantasies about sex, none of this stuff is happening, but when it actually gets down to actually having sex, all this stuff has to come into play, and we don't have the language to discuss the reality of sex and disability sometimes. So I think it's finding that space between fantasy and reality where disability and sexuality tends to live. I think they're receptive, but I think they're being told to not be receptive to it. I think they want that kind of discussions, but again, when we look at porn and we look at like mass communicating queer stuff, what do we see? White, cisgendered, able-bodied men fucking each other, which is great, and that's all well and good, but there needs to be a space for the rest of us to be included in there. And when you start adding people who are marginalized into these mixes of porn, you'll see communication has to happen. If you're fucking me or you want to fuck me or we're gonna fuck, you have to realize that you're gonna say something ableist. You're gonna do something that I might not agree with, and that's okay. Recognize you did it, apologize for maybe doing it, and let's start again. If you're gonna say something inappropriate because you don't know, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean you can't acknowledge that it was wrong. It doesn't mean that if you have a disabled friend and you're sleeping with me, that therefore you're never gonna do something ableist. I think if we would just start acknowledging that we're all ableists a little bit, and once we recognize that, we can move forward and have better sex. The big takeaway around how to fuck a queer cripple is everybody should. It's fun. It's okay to notice that if you're doing it, that it's different. It's non-normative, and that's okay. And there's a power in that of having sex with somebody who's different. And there's a fun, sexy moment in there that I think everybody should experience. People can find me at Andrew Gurza on Twitter, DisAftDarkPod on Twitter for the podcast, andrewgurza.com. which is my website, or Disability After Dark, wherever you get your podcasts.
Or Grinder.
Or Scruff.
Scruff.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was
Thank you.
amazing. It was so funny.